You're listening to the Be Better Off Show by Kelly+Partners.
Good morning. Welcome to the Be Better Off Show, where we meet with great Australians who can share with us how to be healthier, wealthier and wiser and tell us their amazing career stories. So there's a big introduction to one of Australia's finest and most enduring performance artists in Tina Arena. Welcome, Tina.
Good morning, Brett. How are you?
I'm great. Now, I've got to embarrass Tina to start with. What we've got now is somebody who's had a #1 hit in Australia in every decade for 4 decades in a row, has been awarded an Order of Australia, an Order of France, has sung live at the Sydney 2000 Olympics with Andre Bocelli, at the Royal Albert Hall for Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber's 50th birthday, has had a career on the West End in London, a recording career in France, a career that has spanned Australia and the US. There's really not much you haven't done in your industry, Tim, which is amazing. So I'd love to start by asking you, when you're a young person and you get an opportunity, it's a question I haven't heard asked before. I've heard a lot of talking about how you discovered singing at the party, but when you get offered, you and your mum and dad got offered the opportunity for you to go on Young Talent Time, was there ever a question of whether you could do it or not, and what gave you the courage, I guess, to make that leap?
Do you know, it was never, I do actually remember the moment. I actually remember the time when we went to John Young's production house in 229 Lennox Street. It was in the 70s. Late 70s. I remember Mum and Dad driving me there, and we'd arrived, and it was this fantastic old building that still stands today. And we walked into the office on the far right, the first one on the right. It was a beautiful room, and John had all these fabulous gold records on the wall. And I just remember walking into that room, firstly feeling incredibly comfortable. Yeah. Mum and Dad were a little bit displaced. I remember they were kind of looking around, not very nervous. I was cool, calm, walked in there. I remember them conversing. And at one stage, my mind had wandered off, and I was just, looking at the room and checking things out. And I remember John saying to my parents, and to me, Tina, how would you feel to be a part of this show? And I turned around and I said, I'd love it. I so want to be a part of this show. And I knew there and then, at that very moment, that that's what I wanted to do. There was no second guessing. There was nothing. It was just an automatic, very simple gesture of absolutely, yes, I want to be a part of this show. I mean, I was 7, 8 years old.
Amazing. And I guess the two questions that really come from that are, how did you start singing and learn to sing, and what lessons and effort did you have put into that? And then where do you think that confidence came from?
Look, I think that as the years go past, you start digging and people talk and tell stories and so forth. Look, I think the personality was always there. Apparently I was as young as 18 months, and as soon as the music would go on, I would behave differently. I'd be jubilant. I would be engaging, and I would show my parents as early as that there was something. As soon as I started to be able to string a sentence together and so forth, I have an older sister, Nancy, who's 6 years older than me. Yep. So Nancy was probably about 8 or 9 at this time, and she started to get into her music. So the radio was on at home. Yep. in the sunroom, because we had this huge sunroom at the back of the house. So Mum and Dad had this fabulous stereo that they'd bought. So Nancy would play with it and play songs and da-da-da, and Dad would buy records for her. So she basically used to use me as a Muppet. She'd go, right, team, stand here, sing this song, da-da-da. She was making her Barbie clothes at the time and so forth, because she's acutely artistic. And I think she just found this
little doll.
I don't know, this doll, this little thing, and this little robot that she thought, oh, if I teach her this, then maybe she'll do it. And that's how it all started. It was Nancy's fault.
So you go to John Young's studio. He asks you, do you want to be on the show? And I guess, I see people in terms of what helps them get on in life, and parents are so important. The fact your parents were prepared to take you there, what was their, what was their sort of demeanor and mindset about how that should all go?
Well, Brett, they were particularly naive at the time. They were fairly young too. Well, Dad was probably, in his late 40s, Mum sort of about 44, 45. They were a sort of a timid couple, a very elegant couple, very timid. I think they didn't know exactly what they were getting themselves into. However, I think they knew that it was going to change the dynamics of the family, which it absolutely did, because in those days it was a 6-day schedule. So Mum and Dad obviously had to work around their working hours, pick up, drop off for school with Nancy and Silvana, my younger sister. So their whole strategy and logistic template had to change. So I think they didn't know, but I think they knew they were in for a ride of their lives.
And what time was it, Teen, in the day?
Okay, so I went to school normally. I had no tutoring, no special privileges whatsoever. So I'd go to school in the morning. I would be picked up at 3:30, driven to rehearsals, whether that would be in Richmond at the time or Nunawading. In the early days of Young Talent Time, we would do all our recordings, our group recordings at Nunawading. Now, just to give you an understanding, I lived at that time, to get to Nunawading was probably an hour's drive.
Yeah.
So by the time I got there, we started recording. The nights would finish very, very late.
Yeah.
10, 11 o'clock, I would go home, be driven home an hour, and then get up the next morning for school. That happened 6 days a week.
But just for our listeners, you're going to school, you get picked up at 3:30, you're driven across town for an hour, you record or you work on your craft till 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. You're 8 years old, between 8 and 16 when you finish. It's an extraordinary effort. And I know now as a parent, I think of that as a parent, not just as the person doing the work, and it hurts my brain. Think about
Me too.
the effort that was involved. But I guess it's a big theme that overnight success tends to have 6 days a week, 16-hour days for a decade as its foundation. And so I guess to have that sort of investment from your parents and that effort, you've then found in Johnny Young, who I have had some interactions with, and appears to be a very gracious man and a person of a very generous spirit towards other people.
Yeah, very much.
It must have been so good to find, firstly, really your gift and the thing that you wanted to do very early, but then to have somebody who appeared to create a culture and an environment where young people could really explore their gift and thrive and develop themselves.
Look, there's a lot to be said for John, and I think I was quite angry for many years because he was subject to quite a lot of chatter, and people would always sort of go, dismiss him and treat him like a little bit of a has-been. There's one thing I have to say about John. He created a really empathetic, generous culture within Young Talent Time, which today in the industry doesn't exist.
It's very interesting because if the old biblical saying that you can tell a tree by the quality of its fruit, and you look at all of the performers that came out of Young Talent Time and went on and had a career, and even if they didn't, I know through you've mentioned a number of them, even if they didn't end up pursuing music, they've been able to live sort of competent and successful lives because of the sort of development they had at that time. So you go from there at 16, you I guess thrown into the adult world, which is a bit of a gap, really, and then you think that who is the same person at 25 that they are at 16? can you, and without, because it's been well covered, but for a young woman to make that transition, was it really then you're looking around in the industry, had this supportive framework, I guess, and then you're really just, I note even now with, we're filming this in the middle of the COVID crisis, and you can see the crisis in the art because so many people are really sole trading, independent contractors that sort of bounce around between gigs and don't really have a structured, I guess, a family place to live and collaborate.
Yeah.
How did you make the transition, and when did you feel ultimately sort of a bit more grown up and in control of yourself?
Well, it's very interesting, Brett, because that's a brilliant question. It's a brilliant question. A 16-year-old is full of angst. I was coming to the end of a very big, a very rich chapter in experience, in knowledge, in formation, in all sorts of ways. So then, and I was very protected too, because the bubble of YTT was a beautiful protection.
Yeah.
It was a family, everybody looked out for one another. When I got out, it was a very brutal realization because I had obviously the privilege of being able to do that craft on a professional level at a young age exposes you to lots of things emotionally and so forth that you ascertain as a result of that journey. So perhaps emotionally you could be a little bit ahead of others, but I found myself ahead of others in some areas, but then behind in other areas, because during that protective bubble of YTT, of course, skills aren't able to be developed because of that security. So when I got out was when I was faced with the wolves and went, shit, this is a very different landscape. So I struggled tremendously. From 16 to 25, I was signed to Sony Music by the time I was 25. So those years from 16 to 24 were tumultuous. There was a lot of frustration for me. There was an incredible amount of misunderstanding, a phenomenal amount of work on my behalf to have to prove my ability because of the cynicism of my history. That was really difficult to grasp at that time because I turned around and kept saying to myself, why is everybody putting me in a box? I'm a multi-skilled person, yet I'm being put in a box. Really frustrating.
And there's not a great culture of wanting, I often think in Australia the tall poppy syndrome is used to explain a lot of things that probably it shouldn't be, but there is not necessarily a culture in Australia that wants to see people succeed. And so, you've already been successful by 16, so haven't you had enough now, and can't you get a job now? I want
Correct.
That you did get a job in an insurance company. Is that true?
That is exactly what I did, because I was fighting that whole mentality of who do you think you are? And people wanting to bring you down and very much living the ramifications of tall poppy. So that was very present and very understandable and very tangible and real in those days. So then what I did, Brett, was I was so tired of people saying to me, you don't know what it's like, you got it easy. And I thought to myself, wow, listen to these people say. Now, hopefully those very people that would have said those kinds of things in those days would hopefully have taken the time to reflect and realise that what they were talking and saying was absolute rubbish. After that, I knew that I had to forge really, really hard. And then in my early 20s, I had come across not my first manager. My very first manager was a gentleman by the name of Jeffrey Shoecraft, who was wonderful and is still, in my life today, although not very often, but still somebody I respect. Jeffrey had done some real groundwork with Sony Music in those days. He and I did those things. I started songwriting. I decided that I wanted to leave and learn the craft. So I left in 1990 and I moved to Los Angeles. After spending a year on on the stage with David Atkins at the Footbridge Theatre, and I put all my wage aside every single week and put it in my bank so I could raise the funds to take myself and independently finance myself and my songwriting. And Jeffrey helped me to do that. That's how that sort of started, that ball started rolling and so forth. Then I met Ralph Carger in that time, early days. We started collaborating together. Then he had finally ascertained and put the deal together for me to sign to Sony Music. Now, even in the very beginning, before I was signed to Sony Music, the cynicism with regards to my career and what I had done and achieved, and they were so despondent about my past. They were like dismissive of it. It was like, we don't want to know about it. How do we eradicate your past? And I thought to myself,
it's
wow.
Very interesting. Like you had, you know, and for our listeners who may not realise, in those years that you're on Young Talent Time, 25% of all living Australians tuned in every week to watch that show. So the ratings were enormous. It meant that you had huge brand awareness, if you like, before people even understood what that was.
Correct.
A record company sort of saying, okay, well, now you can't be that person. We need to reinvent you and make you a new person, which makes some sense. But for you, learning how to write songs, I guess, and I've been very privileged to see it firsthand, your little diary where you've written actual songs that have been produced. It's an actual craft. It's a real profession. I guess you go to LA, you get the opportunity to start collaborating with people and learn that skill. You get your next manager, Ralph Carr, who helps you do this Sony deal. And then really from there, it's like a rocket. How does it feel when you go away, you write some songs that you think are okay? I guess music people in those days are a different infrastructure. They get around and help you, and they tell you they think they're okay as well. But it's a very vulnerable thing to put your art into the world. When it's very well popularly received as well as critically acclaimed, you get all of your awards and you're rolling around doing things. How does that feel? Is that, can you remember, or is it days into weeks into months into blurs?
There were days into weeks, into months, into years it became a blur, because it was such a profound level of work that went into all of that. And at that particular point in time, whilst I believed that the songs had substance and had integrity, it took some convincing for some people, really genuine convincing, again, because of my past. I knew there was something, but there was so much anxiety. The pressure of achieving and having success was very, very present. I guess I was programmed to be a high achiever. And with that sensibility, which is really high, when you do fall, the lows are really low.
Yeah.
I knew the songs. I knew the songs were great stories and had integrity. It took some convincing in the early days. It really did. The fact that those songs still have a life 25 years later is a true testament to a lot of hard work, some wonderful, wonderful collaborations. I've been so blessed to have worked with some great writers that really helped me bring those stories to life, lyrically and musically. I have a very profound respect for those stories now, even more so, because they've lived through other people. Other people have identified with them, have appropriated those songs to themselves, to their own journeys. That is a great privilege. Yeah. That's a privilege.
That become part of the fabric of people's lives. They mean, so much to so many people. And it's pretty amazing to see, recently 25th anniversary of Don't Ask. I saw you during the lockdown doing your Instagram highlights. But see the warmness of hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands actually, coming in saying, I remember that song because. So during that period, I guess one of the things I wanted to share with you, you've had over now a 40-year career, and you've had a number of management arrangements, I guess. And I guess one of the things I see in the arts, and certainly with you, is that you've got this front person who's performing the music, bringing it to life, and really selling, if you like, selling the art in really communicating and connecting that with people. But behind that is all the people who've written it, all the musicians who've contributed, mostly now on iTunes. They don't even mention who those musicians are, which is, I think, a huge crime.
Well, it's I find that the highest level of disrespect
just
from the
because
digital
it
world.
makes the music look like an individual act when there's this enormous infrastructure and collaboration of a huge team that brings it all together. But as part of that, I guess you've got the commerce. So you've got, you've had 4 or 5 managers, some better than others. But in terms of relationship, that relationship between commerce, I guess, and music, and then the artist and their life. How do you, for a young person out there, what's your take on that?
Well, Brett, I thank you for the opportunity, first of all, to be able to talk about that, because it is an aspect, a very important aspect of the industry that people don't focus on. They focus on the phantasmical aspect of that, of either succeeding, of a collaboration succeeding or failing, and usually it's the failing that they like to focus on. Again, that's a ramification of tall poppy. The relationship between art and commerce is a very delicate one. It is a relationship that's almost like a marriage, where the commerce somehow can trickle through and penetrate through the personal side, because the art is a personal thing as well.
Yep.
Because it's the individual, you're selling or you're advocating your individuality.
Yep.
So it requires commerce to respect the individual aspect of whatever it is that they're selling. So, the relationships aren't easy to find. It's the only thing I could ever say and I do say to artists today, is it is vital, if you want to have any kind of journey, that you find the right business people to collaborate with. Unfortunately, rock and roll has notoriously been a breeding ground for scoundrels.
Yeah.
Scoundrels, not all of them. I'm not going to wipe the slate clean with that, because that would be terribly unfair to those real professionals out there that do an amazing job, and there's a lot of them.
Yep.
However, there has also been this alternative community that have behaved in a very inappropriate fashion, where they prey on your vulnerabilities, they take advantage of your financial situations, they do deals with people where you as the artist don't necessarily have full transparency of. They also, as management, may not have an understanding of how that particular artist needs to be commercially and fiscally set up.
Yep.
They are all very important, vital things. I was very lucky in the early days that my mother had an accountant. My mother and father had an accountant in Footscray in Melbourne. 2 Italian brothers, the Aquaro boys. They ran a really great practice in Australia in the 70s, 80s and 90s. They've now been retired for a long time. But they set up a trust for me as a little girl.
Yep. And banked all your ITT money.
And banked all my YTT money, structured it properly, correctly, totally above board, but it was set up correctly. Now, artists of today need to understand that they are commerce. an aspect of them. If they want a roof over their head and you don't want to live off fresh air, you need to understand that you've got to set yourselves up. Now, this is a conversation you and I have had for years now, because you have been mortified through me meeting other people and so forth as to how people are set up, and in many cases very poorly. So I say to artists, make sure you find those business people that are right and you collaborate with them and you ask them the right questions, those that you don't want to ask.
Yeah, it's
that
very
you may not like the answer to. But that is an education that is vital for the arts to move forward. We've seen in this pandemic, as you know, we had conversation about this in the beginning for hours on end about it.
Yep.
The arts was the first sector to be decimated. It will be the last sector to be reinstated.
Yep.
No question about it. When something goes wrong in society, where does society go? They turn to the arts and go, help us, heal us.
Yep. Yep.
So here we are, we're sitting in this new thing. You know, there are those performers that are able to get job seeker and job keeper, and those that aren't. Those that aren't are those that are not set up properly. They're sitting there freaking out. Hopefully this pandemic will educate them a little bit to take responsibility of their own. The government also needs to play some sort of a role within the arts. Now, I have been very vocal about this to the current government, to people's faces.
Yep.
Because that's the way I talk.
Because there is real nuance in this industry, and like in most industries, they're not obvious in terms of the way they work. But this is an industry where people really come together to collaborate as individuals as part of a team, and then they go off to do their thing.
Well, there's nuances in this business, Brett. It's not clearly black and white. There is stuff in between. So you've got to work around that. But I've also, there was a royal commission into the way in which the industry handles itself. I'm not really sure how successful that royal commission was. A part of me just tends to think that it was just a very diplomatic and formal thing of, well, okay, there's problems, let's do something about it. But in actual fact, the government needs to step in, and this is where I've actually said to them, look, we as artists rely for our work to be promoted on digital platforms.
Yeah.
Now, until there is some sort of an equality that is established between the commerce and the artist's intellectual property, until that is properly regulated, until there is a sense of equality with it, it will not be equal.
That's a great combo, team, because there's two really big movements happening right now. Firstly, the great military power in the world is the US, and they're giving China an absolute beating, and it's largely around intellectual property theft. And then just over the last couple of days, the Russians have had a go at the Chinese for stealing their military hardware.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Which is interesting, and have now refused to supply them with another missile system because the last one I think they sold them they copied. So now there's also this big movement happening, an inquiry and work being done by the federal government on behalf of really Australia's and some of the world's largest media companies, where search engines and others are using their content and not paying them, and it looks like there'll be some sort of situation come out of that. And I guess my hope is that if you have intellectual property, which is so much a part of, it's more than about 80% of the value of listed companies in the US today is attributed to their intellectual property. So if you get these big powers around military, around industry, around news affected in this way, then you hope that at some point the arts is also addressed, because its content being taken and used essentially for free. But without, I guess because it's such a big one, exactly, without getting stuck in there.
No, but what I find really interesting, look, Brett, I would understand the ambivalence of people and governments and so forth, not thinking that it is an urgent priority to find some sort of a proper equilibrium or regulation. But you've got that, it can't be ignored. When the arts, as you know, as somebody who's an avid fan of the arts, you spend money in the arts. I've seen you, you know.
Because I value it, and I know so many.
Because you value it, correct. You understand the role that it plays within society and keeping a society somewhat connected. Let's face it, there's not many sectors today in the world that keep people united or on some sort of an even playing field.
That's a
the
great
arts
point.
does. The arts does. So therefore, let me follow my train of thought. If the Russians are now starting to get their noses out of joint because the Chinese are copying their military intellectual property.
Yeah.
Right? Now, why wouldn't you pay attention to the arts? Australia, it generates billions of dollars a year. That is nothing that you can negate.
No.
That is a very serious, it's a very serious sector that deserves and requires regulation. Now, if the media have come out, Mr. Murdoch and all his mates that own all those publications, if they're coming out now and going, hang on a sec, you're stealing our intellectual property.
Well, that's right. It's been, individual small artists.
Why should we ignore it? And the other thing, Brett, is this. Right. Many years ago, you remember the word MP3, don't you?
Well, they shut MP3 down, but somehow they allowed Spotify, which is, in terms of the return to the artist is negligible to different at all.
Yes, well, I'll tell people what the return of the artist is while we've got everybody here watching, because I like to speak the truth.
Well,
this is what it's about.
We add up for you how much you get from Spotify, and it's 2 bits of SFA.
Thank you very much. So at the end of the day, I'm sitting here and I'm going, okay, so Russia wants to fix this. China's been stealing intellectual property for years.
The Americans are after them.
The Americans, will do what they need to do. Of course, it's in their interest because the American conglomerates too have had an extraordinary imposition and have also imposed themselves on a global level. That's nothing to negate either. Now, that's fine. If they can clear it up, let's hope that they can clear it up.
That's what I'm hoping.
APRA, the Australian body for singers and songwriters, has been in China for years, discussing with them about trying to put a proper infrastructure together for intellectual property. The Australians have been doing it for years, to no success, to no avail at this point. Let us hope that everybody can learn something from what we're all experiencing with the pretext of our health being in danger. But whilst our healths are in danger, the geopolitics that is going on all over the place is ridiculous.
I actually have some hope for the arts, because I think what's happened is the wholesale theft of intellectual property by the Chinese Communist Party on an industrial scale that's never been seen in the world before has actually raised the issue of intellectual property to the highest levels of the world's most powerful governments. And so they're now saying, well, hang on, you're stealing our industrial secrets, you're stealing our military secrets. And in the past, nobody cared when they were stealing off individual artists. But now that they're stealing from major companies, major governments, and for example, Rupert Murdoch has led this charge to say, well, hang on, we are a news organisation, we pay journalists, we create content, and people are stealing it and using it for free on the internet, and we want to be paid. And so hopefully some of these big organisations will do the world a favour by looking to establish a global, infrastructure to regulate and better track down who's stealing when it comes to intellectual property. And I'm hopeful that'll trickle into the arts. Now, that's a big, horrible topic, but the art itself is a beautiful topic. Now that you are, and it would be remiss of me, I wrote a book recently called Investment Wisdom, and I was interviewed yesterday, and the young woman that interviewed me said, Brett, there's 9 investors and only one of them's a woman. What do you say about that? And in fact, 7 of them are old blokes over 60 with a lot of grey hair, and only 2 of them are young, 1 man, 1 woman. And I said, well, that's right. That's the changing face of that industry. But, I'm looking for wisdom, and that often comes from people that are older than 21. And at this point in that industry, they're mainly men. You're very unique in your industry. You've been at it for over 40 years, and you're a woman. And those two things, and a woman from an ethnic background in Australia in terms of being Italian. But when you think about what it takes to have a long career, and then now you look at saying, okay, I'm in the ARIA Hall of Fame. I've had every coloured record they can hand out. What is it that when you look forward for the next 25 years really excites you about your music and what you can do broadly with your creative talents?
That's a fab question too.
That's a big one for a Monday morning, isn't it? What is it?
It is, mate. You've hit the philosophical nerve, and you're just going bing. Yeah. Okay. You know what, Brett?
You still love your.
That's a multi-layered question. But let me try and condense it as simply as I possibly can. What I look forward to moving forwards, and what I've worked really hard these last few years with the help of yourself, with the help of a really couple of wonderful lawyers in Jennifer Hubie and Damien Rinaldi, who are two great lawyers in the arts, with my family. What I look forward to is just to be able to do what I do in the fullest of transparency and honesty that I possibly can. I've always felt as a performer that whilst I understand that smoke and mirrors is a big part of the arts, I also see that there's a big responsibility now moving forwards, and that is to be in your truth, whatever that is. Yeah. Good, bad, indifferent. So for me, moving forwards, it's just about being able to do what I love, being honest with what I do, and just offering it to people in the most transparent way that I possibly can. And you know what? And that means that there will be moments where I may be really amazing. There may be moments where I won't be as amazing, but whatever it is, that I show my true self.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then people don't have to second guess any bullshit. They can just sit there and go, I know what I'm dealing with when it comes to her. That's it.
Great. It's great. Tina, I really want to thank you for sharing with us today. What I try to do on the podcast is bring really great Australians who've got real wisdom, iconic careers, and can share, really from their souls, the things that have made a difference for them. And I know that with the team here at Kelly+Partners, we've been really happy to work with you to help you to I guess really flourish in what you're doing. And I think everyone today who's heard what you've shared will be better off for it. And I guess that's why we call it the Be Better Off Show.
Well, thank you. But, there's also something that I need to say to you too, and that I would like the people that are watching today to understand. And that is, if there's money, when it comes to things that are business, creatives inherently struggle when it comes to commerce because the brain's not programmed that way.
Yeah.
Right? So it is a real struggle. And I know I have struggled with that myself. I've had real issues with it. As you know, I'm the daughter of immigrants. Everything they worked for, they valued, they were implicated, they saved, they did everything for their families. So that gene was definitely, it came through. You have to think about that aspect of your life because you can't live on fresh air. And what I reproach to the industry and to media today in 2020 is stop selling the bullshit dream to people.
Of the arts,
because art requires work. Art requires sacrificing. Art requires compromise.
Yeah, and it's a hard business. And
it is a business that is not valued to the degree that it should be valued, and particularly the remunerative aspect of that industry is appalling. So let's hope the Rupert Murdochs of this world can implement something that can then follow on into other aspects of the arts. But what I want to say is this: I need to thank you for taking the time to look at my globality, to see what it is that works, see what it is that doesn't work, see what can be improved, and see what needs to be eradicated. Now, I've been lucky enough with Kelly+Partners to have that kind of a relationship where it's very transparent, because you know my background and also as performers, we're not remunerated regularly. So it requires us to budget and to do things, to calculate things. You've got to be disciplined in all of that. But I need to thank you guys and the firm for being amazing. And the way in which you guys treat people in the arts is kudos to you. And I've always said the fish stinks from the head down. Always. Yep, I've always said that, and I do believe that. But, I feel that I'm in an environment where I am protected, and it's an environment to which I know I can flourish and do other things and learn, not to mention the knowledge that I've been privileged enough to ascertain through conversation, through asking questions and stuff. And it's a kudos to you, mate. You run a pretty big family, but they're a fab family.
I appreciate it, team. And we love working with you. We love the difference that we can make. And obviously we love the arts and we value it. And that's what we try to show. Hey, I really want to thank you for all of your time today. I know you had to get up, do your hair, so did I. I don't know.
I know, I never put makeup on. I never do this, and I never put a great jumper that says g'day on. Good little Melbourne company. G'day.
Which is great. Hey, have a great day.
You have a wonderful day too. Thanks so much for chatting.
Thanks for listening to the Be Better Off Show. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review on Apple Podcasts.
Have a great day.